I'd like to now introduce our second session, and this is a session on regenerative viticulture and old vines. And this session will be moderated by the brilliant Anne Jones, who is, I'm very proud to say, also a friend of mine. Anne is the development director of the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation. For over 2 decades, she worked in the Waitrose wine buying team and became a wine sustainability consultant. She is the sustainability advisor and ambassador for WineGB. She helped to launch the Sustainable Wines of Great Britain certification and is a founding trustee of the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, focusing on sustainability. She is joined by her colleague, Becky Sykes, who is the program director of the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation. Becky's role is to develop the resource and community network needed to support and connect producers wherever they are on their regenerative journey. She also manages research projects and engages wine educators to spread both awareness and understanding of the benefits of regenerative viticulture. Becky has a passion for regenerative viticulture, an MSc in viticulture and enology, and, just for good measure, a degree in aerospace engineering. Becky and Anne are joined by 2 wonderful producers who are both actively engaged in regenerative farming projects. Fransisca van Zeller is from Van Zeller & Co. in the Douro. Van Zeller & Co. is the oldest port wine family, and they're passionate about sustainability. Fransisca has really led the sustainability project at Aveleda, overseeing over 300 hectares of vineyard. We're also joined by Domenico Veronese, who's the owner of Villa Bogdano in the border between Friuli and the Veneto. Domenico graduated from school in that area and then held leading positions in international investment banks and hedge funds. He's always been passionate about conservation, and in 2016, he was persuaded by his brother-in-law winemaker, Lucio Tessari, to acquire a historic agricultural and viticultural estate near his hometown and to save the very ancient vineyards there from being basically dug up. This started an adventurous restoration and conservation project in and around the Villa Bogdano estate. So I'm delighted to hand over to the panel. Please do put your questions as you go into the Q&A. Thank you, Anne and Becky and our panelists.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for the invitation. It's brilliant to be here. We love collaborating at the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation. That's what we're here to do. So I'm going to introduce us very briefly, and then I'm going to explain our link to old vines, and then move on to the case studies that we've got. So the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation is a charity. We're a global charity, and our vision is to work with nature to create more regenerative viticulture throughout the world. We inspire the transition towards regen through science, and that's where Becky and all of her multiple qualifications come in, by collating science and then communicating it in a way that's relevant to viticulturalists, because we all know that viticulturalists do not have the time necessarily to sit and read academic papers. So Becky does that for you. We also then have a whole project of support for growers, where we want to encourage producers to understand regenerative practices, to understand what the benefits of those practices are, and then also hopefully to measure the improvements, whether that be through carbon or whether that be through biodiversity or ecosystem services. So what is regenerative viticulture? I won't steal Becky's thunder, but effectively it's a holistic principle. It has to look at every different part of the ecosystem, which is why I think it's so hard to define. And I enjoyed Jonathan's comment earlier about making sure that we're walking the walk. And I think that's part of what we're here to do, is to make sure that people can do that in a way that's really credible. But equally, there's a lot of global principles, but they have to be applied locally to each individual vineyard. And there are lots of different kind of interrelated jigsaw pieces. And I think that's where the old vine element comes in, because actually the age of the vine and having old vines interrelates with lots of these different practices. So we're really excited today to be joined by 2 fantastic viticultural viticulturalists or potentially domain owners, and they've been looking at very specific site-specific experiments. I'm not going to introduce those in too much detail because they're going to do that themselves. And then after that, Becky is going to be able to talk a little bit more about the interrelation of those specific site-specific trials and what that means from a global perspective of regenerative viticulture, and also how that relates to old vines. So that means that you've got a really wide scope for questions. Please do put them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to field them either as we go, or will we open up for questions at the end. So first of all, I'm going to turn to Fransisca, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you've been up to.
Hello. How are you, Anne and Becky and Domenico and everybody else assisting us? Thank you so much for joining us. This will be a very exciting conversation, even though my really long presentation, I'm going to try and make it quite short. So I'll briefly talk about our own journey with old vines and regenerative viticulture. We are walking the walk as I speak. So we're in the beginning of this journey. We have been turning to regenerative viticulture in the past 3 to 4 years, and gradually. Just very briefly, Van Zellers and Company is an old family company. I'm the 15th generation in working in the wine trade, and we have always produced wines in the Douro Valley. The Douro Valley is one of the most, well, I know I'm influenced, but one of the most beautiful regions in the world, but it's definitely one of the oldest demarcated wine regions in the world. One of the great particularities of this region is it's a mountainous area, and we have many different types of plantings of vineyard. And when we talk about old vines and old vineyards, we are referring to high density plantings, plants that are above 40 years of age, and a very interesting particularity in our vineyards, which is a diversity of varieties that are mixed in the vineyard. So when we are talking about regenerative viticulture, we can never talk about what is indicated to a certain variety. We are talking always parcel. And when we refer to parcel, it can always be a big diversity of varieties. This is just a general map to show you where our vineyards are. And Anne, please do feel free to interrupt me as I speed talk in our short presentation. But one of the very important references for our vineyards and our old vines is that we have very different locations and different plantations. Some of them are mechanized, others are not. So we still use horse plow, for example, to be able to plow the land in the middle of each row. And that will also influence what type of treatment and what type of practices we use in each one of our plots. Today, we are focusing on regenerative viticulture, which for us and maybe for all regenerative viticulturalists starts with the soil and with soil health. So talking about soil health, I'm going to present a study that we're doing that we started at the beginning of this year. It's the insect frass study. We are doing this in partnership with the Aveiro University and a company that has produced the insect frass called Intogreen. What is insect frass exactly? Well, it's collected from the exoskeleton of a particular larvae of black soldier fly. It's very nutrient rich in organic material, and it contains essential macro and micronutrients. And one of its most active biocompounds is chitin, which is in higher concentration in this insect frass. And chitin will help stimulate plant growth and enhance the health of the soil. So this is something that was interesting when I met Susana Loureiro, who was heading this study at the University of Aveiro, and she talked to me a lot about the particularities of chitin. And so we embarked on this study to see what could be the influence of the insect frass and chitin on soil health, productivity, and just the development of the vines. So just to go into exactly what we're doing. We selected one of our vineyards. It's called the Valença vineyard it's called the Carvalhal vineyard in Valença do Douro. The total area is above 3 hectares, even though we've narrowed it down to much smaller parcels within the area. And we have applied 3 different treatments. The first treatment is a mixture of the insect frass with what we normally apply, which is the uraguano, which is an organic fertilizer. The second parcel will be 100% insect frass, and the third parcel will be 100% uraguano. To give you a little bit of the calendarization of what we've done, so in January 2024, at the beginning of this year, before we added any treatment to the soil, we collected soil samples. In February, we then added the insect frass. And in the flowering season and in the veraison, we collected samples of both soil and plants. One interesting measuring tool that we're using is tea bags, which I will go back into more detail in the next slide. But we added the tea bags in May and removed them in September so that we can measure the decomposition of the soil. Just to give you also an idea of quantities in terms of the insect frass, we've had to apply around 1,100 kilos in total. And to get the same concentration of organic matter in the uraguano, we had to apply around 1,800 kilos. This just to show that we have applied a little less frass in total to get the same concentration of organic matter. So what we're measuring is the decomposition rate of each soil, depending on the fertilizers that were applied, the productivity levels of how many kilos of grapes we have collected, the plant physiology, so chlorophyll in each leaf, what is the nutrients that are found in the cycle that we have of the nutrients in the soil, and also respiration. So we're measuring closely the bacteria and enzymatic activity. The tea bag index, and I'm an early walker in this walk, was very interesting to see because this is literally a very easy to apply and very cheap way of measuring the health of the soil. And it literally just has to do with studying the rate at which the tea bag decomposes. So we buried tea bags at different points in each one of the parcels and then measured how far they decomposed depending on what was applied on which one of the parcels. This graph shows that on average, or there's a slight tendency, because the numbers are quite close, the decomposition rate is 1. This tea bag is 100% complete, and then all the way down to 0, it's been decomposed. So when we're looking at 0.3, it's been decomposed down to 30% of its total weight. With the frass, it's 23% of its total weight, and just uraguano, 26% of its total weight. So there's a tendency that with the frass application, the decomposition of the tea bags is slightly higher, which means that the activity, enzymatic or biological activity in the soil has been slightly better. But this is one of our indications. The second one is the nutrient cycling, where we are analyzing enzymatic activity. At this point in time, the parcel that has 100% frass application has slightly lower enzymatic activity on all stages and throughout time. And the one with the larger enzymatic activity tends to be the one with 100% uraguano application. However, we are not concluding anything from this because this study will take 3 years to be measured. And we believe that part of the results is being influenced by past applications of uraguano, of other organic matter. So it will need 3 years to actually be considered 100% frass applied. In terms of the plant physiology, we have no results to present today because it's still ongoing, but all our results will be published on our website throughout time, so they will be completely searchable. And then in terms of soil respiration, it is clear that the amount of what we're measuring here is how happy bacteria are living in the soil and how happy they are working depending on the nutrients that we are giving them through either the blend of oregano and frass, just frass or oregano. And it's clear to see that the behavior of 100% frass and 100% oregano is quite similar throughout time, throughout flowering and veraison. In terms of productivity, and this is an indication that great, we get more fruit out of the plant, and probably the plant was producing at a better rate. We get better results where the frass has been applied. Again, this is the first year, so we are sharing these results without any conclusion. It's just a total transparency sharing that we got positive results where frass was applied, and throughout time we will understand why exactly that happened and if that has been maintained. So what we expect to achieve with the application of frass is a revitalized soil, higher productivity, but above all, environmental benefits. A healthier soil that is able to reduce the number of applications of treatments and also reduce the amount of product applied, and that positively impacts biodiversity and the soil ecosystems. This always with taking in mind that with old vines, regeneration is very important in the aspect of keeping old vines alive and old. And so this is the team that is helping us do this at University of Aveiro. I think Rita is watching the conference today. I think she would be with us. And these are other practices, but Anne, I'm not sure if you want me to go into them now or...
I think you could, if you can have like a minute just to go through the top titles, and then maybe we'll come back to the detail later if we have time.
Okay, so basically between our mechanized vineyards and our non-mechanized vineyards, we either plant brassicas and have biodiversity corridors, or we simply apply the horse plow with simpler biodiversity corridors. What this means, the brassicas in one way are plants that have very deep roots and also have a very tall overgrowth. So as soon as they grow deeper roots, we have the capacity of then creating better water retention. And once we kill the plant through natural plowing with the tractor, with a small tractor that runs through, those roots will then be absorbed into the soil, creating natural organic matter that is absorbed into the soil, as well as the fallen overgrowth. With the biodiversity corridors, they are natural habitats for insects and wildlife, and they promote a more balanced ecosystem. The presence of these different species enhance the soil health, again, with added nutrients. And with the traditional plowing, the person responsible for our viticulture, Luís Menezes, he mentions that every time he sees a horse in the region, he stops to speak to the owner, because that person will hold a lot of knowledge of what used to be done in the region before herbicides were massively applied. And the horse plow has many advantages, not just in soil aeration and decompacting the soil, but also in burying back organic matter next to the vine roots. And so it's something that we do on a rotation every 2 to 3 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. What a brilliant presentation. So exciting. I think if there's one thing that all of us are going to take away, it's the tea bag index. But hopefully we'll all learn from some of the more details. And also thank you so much for your transparency. I think actually being able to see these experiments as they go along and everyone else being able to learn from them is so valuable to the industry as a whole. So thank you. I have had some questions, but I think probably in the interest of time, what we'll do is we'll go to Domenico next. We'll hear from his project, and then I will collate some questions, and I'll get Becky to answer them. Perfect. Lovely. Thank you. So Domenico, would you like to come and tell us about what you're doing?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. And yeah, it's an honor to be in such a great company. So let me share my...
And now, a word from our sponsor. Dracaena Wines loves to give back. There are so many fur babies that deserve to find their forever home. We would love to be able to help as many as possible. If you are part of a nonprofit organization or know of a nonprofit organization that would like to hold a fundraiser, please contact us at contact@dracaenawines.com or visit our website, dracaenawines.com, to fill out the form. How does the fundraiser work? It is super simple and costs your group absolutely nothing. Together, we will choose a month that your group will be sponsored. During the month, you promote the fundraiser just like any other event you'd hold. At the end of the month, we will donate 20% of the sales to your organization. The donations will be made in the name of each individual who purchased the wine so that you know exactly who helped the animals. Our goal is to raise as much funds as we possibly can and to help as many animals as possible. So please help us help as many fur babies as we possibly can.
So as Sarah mentioned, Villa Bogdano is located right on the border between the regions of Veneto and Friuli in the northeast of Italy. So in between the Adriatic Sea and the Alps. And it has been carrying the organic certification since '93, and it is a biodiversity conservation site protected by the European Union. We have started as well 1 year ago a partial biodynamic conversion process, and we have an extension of just about 18 hectares of old vines, which basically means that we are a very delicate and precious environment, and it's very important for us to introduce and implement regenerative agriculture practices, because the objective is that of minimizing soil disturbance and making sure we are preserving this very delicate environment that we have. So there are a variety of practices that we are introducing from the cover crops to the preservation of all the vines, which includes a project which we have just started of mussel selection of some of our oldest vine varieties over a surface of just short of 5 hectares, and increase in biodiversity, which is the focus of our presentation today. Increasing biodiversity is mainly achieved within our estate in 3 ways. We are trying to preserve a small planitia forest which has a lot of protected species, both of plants and animals. We are at the same time very focused on the preservation of old vine biotypes, and a project that we have introduced approximately 2 years ago in cooperation with European Union and IAB, which is the Association of Biologic Organic Agriculture for Friuli Venezia Giulia. We have started this food forest project, which is basically aimed at increasing biodiversity, and in particular functional biodiversity. So what is this project? It basically consists in planting over a surface of just over 4,000 meters a variety of trees, bushes, shrubs of approximately 41 different species, and most of them are fruit trees. The idea is basically, besides the natural advantages of agroforestry, so of having trees and shrubs next to vines, which is typically supply of nitrogen, the contrast of soil erosion and compaction, etc. But one of the major goals is that of attracting beneficial insects. So the trees and shrub varieties have been selected for their ability of creating a habitat which can attract pollinating insects and at the same time antagonist insects. So insects that have the ability of fighting both parasites and phytophagous insects, so all the insects that are basically enemies of the vineyards. As a part of the project, it's the aim of being open to the public, so hopefully helping to raise the awareness about our project and about the importance of biodiversity. It's pretty clear that in contrast with what has happened over, in particularly the last 50 years, where farming and viticulture has become extremely specialized, and this has exposed the vineyards to an extreme fragility to climatic and biological factors. So by introducing a food forest, what we are trying to do is making sure we are enriching the territory over the ground and under the ground. We know that the vast majority of microbial life is living under the ground, so it's very important to create a virtual loop between all the organisms that live in the trees and under the ground. And this is becoming particularly important in a world where we are noticing day by day the impact of climatic change and of destruction of the soil, which are partially weather related. It's just a simple instance. We had in the last 2 years very violent downpours of rain, and this means that you have phenomena of leaching, which basically means that all the nutrients are washed away and the vine is not able to access the nutrients because they're simply washed away by an excess of water. This is just on the top left a brief representation of where the food forest is planted. It's nearby on the left. We have a Pinot Grigio vineyard, so it's right next to one of our vineyards, and we have a list of with the scientific names of the specific trees that have been planted, and it's just over 40 different types. Functional biodiversity, as I was mentioning, is about creating a habitat for specific insects that are beneficial to the vine. And we can see on our left 2 creatures which most winemakers and viticulturists know quite well and hate: the grapevine moth and the Scaphoideus titanus, the one on the bottom right, which is the vector of a very bad disease, a phytoplasma called gold flavescens, and it's a hopper that is infesting vineyards, and by feeding of the vine, it's basically, as a vector, is transmitting the phytoplasma, which then infects the plants. And for organic producer in particular, gold flavescens, it's a pest. It's a very bad disease because we do not have any means to fight it, and so typically it leads to the explanting of the vine. Why do we care? We take a very simple and pragmatic approach. Being an extremely delicate habitat with protected species, and being in a part of Italy and of Europe where the climate is not very generous, is a difficult climate. We have almost 1,000 millimeters of rain over the year, and they are quite well distributed over the years. So we have to pay special attention to lots of diseases, which means every little helps. And by introducing projects like the food forest and many other regenerative practices, we are not trying to find a magic stick for solving all of our problems, and we're fully aware that no magic stick is existing, but it's more about making sure that we increase the efficiency of everything we are doing, because it's very difficult. It's a very difficult environment, so every little really helps. We are trying as well to increase the resilience to extreme weather events and to climate change, which is becoming more and more important. And we are focusing on quality, and we are fully convinced that biodiversity is improving the quality of the fruit of the wines. And it's not only for the obvious reason that there is an impact from the presence of trees and other plants. It is impacting the microclimate of the vineyard, providing shadow, reducing erosion, and many other things. But it's very simply helping the vine to avoid stress. And when a vine is avoiding stress, it's typically producing a very good fruit. And then there's a last observation that it is more difficult, and we are still, from a scientific point of view, we're still at the beginning of understanding of how biodiversity is impacting the aromatic profile of grapes. Is it because of chemical reactions happening during pollination or happening over the ground, or is it underground interactions via mycorrhizae or microbial activity? There is some scientific evidence, but it's still quite limited. But that the increase of biodiversity is changing the profile, aromatic profile of the grapes, and we have personally started to witness how some vineyards are benefiting from the near proximity to our forest and to fruit trees. And last but not least is reducing the use of scarce resources like water and energy. And we are not only talking about ethical sustainability, but what is equally important is the economic sustainability. And we know how much water and energy are expensive for a winemaker. Another simple example is noticing that, unfortunately, in recent years, Italy has seen a drop of certified organic vineyards. So the positive trend has stalled. We had reached just over 20%. Now we're back to just over 18%. And this is a confirmation that practicing organic and is not always a simple path. But our view is, when we ask ourselves the question, is it worth the effort? The answer is only if you take a long-term approach. And if you take a long-term approach, our answer is definitely yes, it is worth the effort.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Domenico. We've been given until past. So I'm going to give Becky a very brief 3 or 4 minutes in which she's also going to answer 2 questions. One of which is how regenerative viticulture relates to agroecology, and one of which is how it interrelates with organic. So good luck, Becky. 3 minutes. Off you go.
Oh.
And then we'll come back to a couple of the other questions.
Anne quite likes to give me a challenge. So hello, everybody. That was really exciting. And I've got so many questions I want to ask. But first of all, I just want to say that regenerative viticulture, as we know, it's an overarching philosophy. It's not science-led. It's about working with nature rather than against it. And it considers the whole ecosystem of the vineyard. There's lots of best practice from generations before us, 15 generations in Fransisca's case, which is just incredible. But lots of new technological innovations, things like drones that people use to deliver predatory bugs and things like that. So how does it relate to agroecology? They are essentially very similar things, that pretty much the same word, different words for the same thing. And agroecology as a phrase has been around for quite a bit longer. And in France, it's used still a lot instead of the phrase regenerative or regeneratrice, as they like to say there. So they are essentially the same thing. Here we talk about, on my slide, about overcoming some of the objections to organics and biodynamics. So organic and biodynamic are extremely high gold standards of farming grapes. But some people find that with organic viticulture, there can be an over-reliance on copper sulfate for and there can be an over-reliance on ploughing. And then in biodynamics, some people find that they struggle with the lunar cycle aspect and the slightly more spiritual side of it. So regenerative viticulture is a kind of pragmatic version of that, where we meet growers where they already are and help them to improve their biodiversity, improve their soil health. There are 5 key principles that are generally widely accepted. That's not disturbing the soil any more than you absolutely have to. Keeping that soil covered as much of the year as you possibly can. Keeping living roots in the soil as much of the year, because they act as like mini solar panels, feeding that soil microbiome all through the year, and keeping animals in the cycle for their manure, and also avoiding a monoculture, so having as much diversity as you can, which we've seen in these 2 presentations today. We hear lots of phrases about a teaspoon of soil containing more microorganisms than there are people on the planet, and all sorts of things like that. But essentially, there are thousands of conversations going on under our feet every time we stand on the soil. And those conversations are enabling nutrients to get to our vines. And then in conventional tillage, we often really put those at a disadvantage by essentially chopping them up or putting fungicides on them. So what we try and do in regenerative viticulture is to try and allow those microbes to do their job as much as we can. Fransisca had this fabulous tea bag way of measuring the soil, but this was a campaign last year and the year before where people were burying their underpants in the soil, in different soils, to see how the microbial life would decompose them over a certain period of time. And it was actually quite eye-catching, and it wasn't invented by the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation, it was a global campaign, but it was a really interesting and cheap way of seeing how effective your soil health is at breaking things down. I just thought I'd put that in there for some light humor. So what's the relevance to old vines with regenerative viticulture? So old vines and their root systems contain a huge amount of carbon, and if we can possibly keep that sequestered in the plant and in the soil, then we're doing a huge favor to the planet. When they're farmed sensitively, which the vast majority are because they've managed to survive for so long, they support a huge network of soil life. There's a lot of genetic variation, which both Fransisca's talked about with her field blends with different varieties all planted together, and then they are often in small blocks. So instead of having very large vineyards, they're often in smaller ones, which still have those hedgerows, still has those trees, and those trees that allow bats to fly around. And let's face it, if we're replanting a vineyard, we often do a huge amount of damage. We pull out all the vines, and then we chop up those mycorrhizal networks, and we do lots of damage. I know tomorrow there's going to be a lot of talk about adaptation, how old vines are adapted to climate change. So I'm not going to go into that now because we've also just run out of time. So I just want to very quickly say what the role of the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation is. We look at the science that exists to try and see what the gaps are in the science behind regenerative viticulture. We look at the best ways to communicate that through newsletters, social media, things like that. And we look to support growers because we know it can be quite lonely if you're trying to do something different to what the previous 14 generations of your family have been doing with those agronomists. So we've developed something called the RV Guide, which takes growers through the 16 practices we think are important, which I'm not going to list. And if you're not actually a grower, but you're interested, on our website, this is listed under Toolkit. It's the same information. But for growers who've gone through our guide, they can then choose to be included on a map. And we launched this summer, and we're just starting to populate this map with growers who are farming regeneratively or interested in farming regeneratively, so that people can come together and form their own smaller regional groups and help each other, because we know that people don't learn really particularly well through PowerPoint presentations. They actually decide to make changes based on seeing with their own eyes what's happening at neighbours' farms where that's been successful. You can find people doing specific practices on there if you go onto our website. Thank you very much. That's me done.
Thank you, Becky. That was a very whistle-stop tour. And actually, you've managed to cover off the answers to most of the questions in the question box. Really great session. And thanks for inviting us, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thank